whether it feels like it or not, there's much to look forward to in the coming months. Longer days, warmer temps, and of course, the promise of March Madness. It's good to remember the brighter days ahead as we struggle with many of the same challenges that have plagued us, no pun intended, for months now. The Omicron variant is disrupting our daily lives and making us question whether the pandemic will end. Workers are still hard to find, supplies and goods remain elusive, throwing inflation and the potential for international conflict, and there's much to keep us up at night. But here in the Inland Northwest, we aren't afraid of a little adversity. We're nothing if not resilient, resourceful, and perseverant. At the Journal of Business, we endeavor to keep you, our readers, informed about what's happening in our community. Our staff is dedicated to providing you with objective information on news and trends, with the goal of helping you be more successful on your chosen path. It's time to go beyond the sound bites. It's time for more depth than 140 characters can provide. It's time for elevating the conversation.
Welcome to Elevating the Conversation, and hope you're having a great afternoon. My name is Paul Reed, and it's an honor to serve as publisher of the Journal of Business. And it's also an honor that each month so many of you join us for these important conversations in our community. You know, we launched this series a year ago just because of that, because you asked us to have a venue where we can have those important conversations. And we had a great year last year. We had Stephanie Curran from the PFD, and Frank Velazquez, and Keonta Duncan, and Jim Frank, and Steve Scranton, Christine Johnson, Shelley O'Quinn, Larry Crowder, and many others, covering topics ranging from the pandemic to housing shortages and many more. Already this year, we've had Brian Fix in last month to talk about the labor shortage. Next month, we have Nicole Sohn of Journey Discovery Center talking about Spokane's childcare crisis, also a hot button in our community right now among employers. But today, I'm very pleased to have with us Michael Senske, Chairman and CEO of Pearson Packaging Systems, for discussion about supply chain issues in the Inland Northwest. At this point, all of us have been impacted by supply chain issues, and stories abound about the negative impacts and really the innovative strategies that some are taking to deal with this issue. This should be a compelling discussion. But before we get to that, I want to thank Contract Design Associates for sponsoring this month's Elevating the Conversation. You know, we don't get to do these things without some great partners, and Contract Design Associates have been a great partner of the Journal of Business. Today, I am pleased to have CDA's Gwen Gunzel with us to say a few words and to tell us a little bit more about this great company. Welcome, Gwen.
For over 40 years, Contract Design Associates has been designing spaces that put people first. We are more than furniture. We are the industry experts supporting our customers through the whole process, from professional space planning to design and installation. Customers in sectors such as healthcare, education, local, state, and federal government to corporate. Our team has provided customers with premier solutions, developing modern environments in which our customers work, learn, heal, and live. We assist customers in selecting the right products to maximize functional requirements, aesthetics, budgets, design vision, and timelines. This proven process results in the best possible combination of long-term quality, value, and productivity. As the priorities in the workplace have shifted, many companies turn to CDA to help them think differently about their spaces. Customers are eager for solutions that can bring connection, balance, and a sense of well-being. As a Herman Miller dealer for over 40 years, our family of brands just got bigger with the addition of the legendary Knoll brand. We offer our clients the most collective of dynamic brands in the market today. With this addition, we can meet our customers everywhere life happens. We now have 3 locations, Spokane, Missoula, and Bozeman, supporting Eastern Washington, Northern Idaho, and Montana. If you would like to learn more about Contract Design Associates, please visit our website at cdainteriors.com. At Contract Design Associates, our customers are our first priority. Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Gwen Gunzel. I am the owner of Contract Design Associates, our region's leader in workplace furnishings. A shout out and special thanks to the Journal of Business for offering the opportunity to sponsor today's Elevating the Conversation. We look forward to hearing from Michael Senske on today's topic, supply chain issues in the Inland Northwest. As a local business, we too have encountered supply chain issues. These continue to disrupt our business by creating persistent delays and challenges, which unfortunately impact our customers. As a business owner, I remain optimistic and excited for what 2022 can be. It is important we continue to have grace and work together through these challenging times, remain committed to our customers, and appreciate their business and support. Thank you.
Thank you, Gwen, and good afternoon, everybody. My name is Lynn Parrish. I'll be your host for the next 45 minutes or so. Joined by Michael Senske. Good to see you, Michael.
Yep. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us this afternoon. We're going to be talking about supply chain issues, as you know. But before we get into the dynamics of that, I thought it would be good to just kind of lay a foundation of what Pearson Packaging does so people have a better understanding of the context from which you're speaking.
Right. No, be happy to. So Pearson Packaging Systems is an engineering services firm and a capital equipment manufacturer. So we build equipment that automates the process of erecting corrugated cases, packing corrugated cases, sealing them, and placing them on pallets. So we build machinery that we sell to our customers really all over the world to again automate their processes as it relates to packaging.
Sure. So in addition to being affected by the supply chain, you are part of the supply chain for some.
We are. Yeah. Most of our
yeah.
customers, we serve primarily, food is just over 50%. So it's the food industry, the beverage industry, chemical and personal care, and pharma. And so we are part of the supply chain primarily for Fortune 500, companies in those spaces.
Sure. So how would you characterize how your company has been affected by supply chain issues?
It's kind of been a tale of two parts of the pandemic. From March 2020 really to March of 2021, we saw very few interruptions or even hiccups in the supply chain. There were a couple exceptions to that. We had a couple of suppliers that didn't frankly manage the pandemic particularly effectively. They were located in different states and frankly, they were having real difficulty keeping their workforce intact.
Sure.
Kind of at the height of the first phase of the pandemic. And so we saw a few hiccups and interruptions at that point, but really with one or two exceptions, we just cruised through the first, year without any problems.
Now, can I ask, before you get into the second phase there, how was business during that time?
So there was a slight downturn, in sales at the very, very beginning in March and April, maybe a little bit of May during the pandemic, as people just really adjusted to working instead of in their facilities, in many cases remotely.
Yeah.
And it took people time to kind of marshal the resources and kind of, redefine some of their processes. But then it picked up more or less to what I would say pretty close to normal levels for the remainder of 2020.
Sure.
And frankly, it's been accelerating really ever since then, as people look to automation, kind of in the wake of the pandemic. It's a pretty effective way to ensure that you're going to be able to meet your customers' demands. Sure.
Now I interrupted you. You were talking about two different parts. And so what was the second part like?
Well, so after we, like I mentioned, March to March, 2020 to 2021, pretty smooth sailing. When we got into that April timeframe in 21, we actually started seeing the first supply chain interruptions and on like fabricated components, for example. So parts that are cut from metal. There were metal shortages, things like that. So we actually saw it in that part of the business first, where all of a sudden their inventories of raw materials had dwindled. It was taking longer to actually replenish them. There were pretty significant price increases, in order to replenish them. And we started to see some interruptions. But then that slowly started to leak into a lot of other components that we purchase. And that raw material interruption, it corrected itself pretty quickly. I mean, if it's kind of started in April of 21, maybe by the end of June, we were in pretty good shape. But that's when we started to see other components. There's a lot of what I would call like electrical components, things like that find their way onto our machines. And we started really seeing problems, at that point in time. And the problems were twofold. It was just the inability to get them. Right. And then having to source alternatives, which I'm sure we'll talk about a little bit later.
Right.
It was the inability to get it, or if we were able to get them, it was at an incredible cost increase, price increase, just so that we could bid away those scarce resources from other consumers.
Right.
And that really is going on to this day, and it's just kind of working its way through. But I mean, it is the single biggest challenge we actually have today is the availability. It started with some electrical components. It found its way into gearboxes and motors, into PLCs, essentially the computers that control the machines and that we program. Really across the board. So it's been a difficult year.
Yeah, of course. I'm wondering, is it something where you've seen any sort of rhyme or reason to it? In other words, do you see when one thing's short, everything's short, or has it been less predictable than that, to where it will be more hit and miss with different pieces?
It has been. It hasn't been everything at the same time. And I think it's because there are different reasons for the shortages, not all of which I claim to understand.
Right.
But, in some instances, the shortages have been caused by components that are being manufactured, let's say in China. And as those facilities, like recently with Omicron, as they've shut some of their facilities down or throttled them way back, we're already seeing a lack of availability, or being warned of a lack of availability, kind of in the future on certain components. And so some of them have just been due to output being smaller. In some cases, it's been because the demand for those components, for whatever reason, you saw kind of, the economy kind of take a pretty big dip, and then it came back very, very quickly. And certain components that there were not sufficient inventories available, all of a sudden were consumed all at the same time. And so it's been all over the board.
It's
been all over the board.
Which makes it more challenging to address.
Yeah.
You mentioned China, and one of the things that I've heard from people in other businesses is that a lot of times they're waiting for either components or finished product that are on boats waiting to get into ports here. So a little bit of a bottleneck here in that area. Have you seen that?
Well, I mean, we have. I mean, it's it's interesting. That's definitely some of it. I couldn't tell you exactly what percentage of that is likely, but there have been instances where that hey, it's on a boat. It's kind of, sitting outside of the Port of Long Beach.
Right.
And as soon as they work through that backlog, and again, there have been a lot of reasons why that backlog hasn't been worked through, but, availability of labor, low labor pool participation, things like that. So some of that has affected us. What I would say most of it has really just been is actually the lack of availability. In our case, it's they have not been able to keep up with demand, and there weren't sufficient inventories. I think in our case with our supply base, they had pretty significant inventories built, so that we kind of made our way through 2021 with a false sense of security, I think, while those inventories were being diminished and were being consumed. And then when they had to ramp back up, at least in our case, it was really difficult for them to do that. So it's been just lack of availability of components or the actual product itself.
Yeah. Have you identified any strategies to help you deal with that? In other words, if I remember correctly, you've been a pretty big proponent of lean manufacturing through the years.
Seemed like a good idea at the time.
There's some sound principles involved with that. But have you found yourself keeping a larger inventory than you would have, or going against some of those principles that had worked for you for so many years?
Yeah, there's been two main approaches that I would just say, and if I forget one of them, you can nudge me a little bit. But I mean, one of them is just ensuring that our distribution partners either have the inventory themselves, or that we're investing in some of that inventory.
Right.
And even if we invest in that inventory, it doesn't mean it has to come into our facility here in Spokane or in Richmond, Virginia. we can pay for it to stay on their shelves, but it's allocated for us. So we have definitely invested more in ensuring that critical components are in supply for us.
Yeah.
The other thing is that we've always had some very, very strong partnerships. We've really prided ourselves on the long-term partnerships we've had with some of our key component suppliers.
Right.
And so we weren't really pitting them against one another.
Sure.
These were very long-standing relationships. Well, one of the strategies we really had to approach is that in the designs of our machines, ensuring that we have a drop-in replacements from other manufacturers, because just because company A doesn't have what we need doesn't mean that company B manufactures something that is very, very close or the same in terms of functionality and quality.
Yeah,
and so now we have 3 or 4 or 5 suppliers of each of those components, where typically maybe we had 1 or 2. We just had to deepen the supply chain.
Sure. Have you had any suppliers go out of business?
No, not at this point in time.
Okay.
A lot of the components we purchase, what's really interesting is what we purchase locally. When you think about touchscreens, like human machine interfaces, the PLCs, the computers that control the machines. You think about pneumatic actuators or cylinders or servo motors or gearboxes, things like that. We're buying them from local distributors, but they're manufactured internationally. There are some things that we buy from smaller companies here in town, like fabricated components, like parts, cutting metal and chips, things like that. And when I say chips, metal chips.
Right.
And they've all been very, very healthy. They've all done very, very well. They've had their ups and downs. So we haven't really had any problems with them no longer being able to serve us.
Oh, that's good news. That's good news. I want to mention something real quick before I forget. We do have a question and answer feature. So after Michael and I are done with our conversation, we'll be able to field some of your questions. So please, at any time, feel free to add your questions, and we'll get to all of them, or many of them, when we're done talking here. I wonder about this volatility that's been, I think it's safe to say, long-term now in our market. When do you see stabilization in that supply chain issue, this supply chain issues that we're all seeing, and what's it going to take?
Well, I mean, so what's interesting is I don't pretend to speak. I mean, there's a lot of, big companies in Spokane that have even more complex supply chains than us, and they would probably know just as well. And it might be even a little bit different. But what I would say is what we're being communicated, right now, our view is a lot of the key suppliers that we're struggling with now are being very open that they think that this is an issue that they are going to be struggling with into the first quarter of 2023, certainly, and potentially have some kind of follow-on effects after that. But it's manageable, right? We're managing, it's just taking more effort than normal.
Right.
And so, from our perspective, we don't really expect this to continue to be a challenge, certainly for the remainder of this year. And again, it's not that we can't overcome it. It's just forcing us to maybe kind of deal with things differently. Like you talked about inventories, like our number one robot supplier, and a very big strategic partner is Fanuc, Fanuc America.
Right.
And interestingly enough about Fanuc, it used to be that they had plenty of robots available. They call them pipeline robots. And now, for the first time, when you walk into our facilities, we talked about now, there might be 20 of them sitting in a corner, kind of shrink wrapped and ready to go. And so we'll get through it. And I think most people and even other people in our industry are getting through it. It's just taking a different approach.
Sure. Well, that's interesting.
It's not existential for us, I guess, is the best way to put it.
Right. No, that's a good way to put it. It's interesting when you talk about the shrink wrapped robots. So you basically have those in reserve for when you need them. Have they changed that availability then?
They have, and I'm not picking on them because they've been wonderful partners to deal with, but they were very open about, hey, these are some of the ways that maybe we can work together to deal with this. And so, that was one of the ways they kind of suggested is, hey, let's really look at forecasting and let's do a better job of forecasting, and let's order what you think you need, and not things on the fringes, but the 80-20 rule. It's like 80% of the robots we're going to use are going to be these 2 models. So let's start building an inventory of those robots, and then we can deploy them as we need to. It's also caused us to even look at, like, swapping one robot for another, where maybe you thought you were going to use Model A, or same thing can be said for a gearbox. You were going to use Model A. You just modify the design on the fly to accommodate a different technology completely.
Right.
But that will deliver the same level of performance, the same level of quality, and the machine looks different. And we've had to modify it, but we've been able to take advantage of what's actually available to us.
Sure. That makes a lot of sense. And I'm not hearing this from you, but one thing I've heard from some others is a strategy is ordering 150% of what you need, or just flat out as much as you can get of components or
we've done maybe a little bit of that, in certain components where we've just said, hey, we need to have some level of safety stock, things that are common. But generally speaking, what we're doing is, instead of them coming in just as we need them, like in the same day as we're consuming them, for example, we're just going really back to the distributors and saying, hey, if normally we would use X during this period of time, we're just asking them to that same X based on our forecast, that same number. But usually we might have 1/4 of those, like in their facility. So we're asking them just to stock up for us, so that we have maybe 3 or 4 months supply instead of a month's supply sitting on their shelves. And they've been incredibly cooperative, and it's not just us they're dealing with, of course, with this problem. And so but they've been really helpful.
Yeah, that's great. You had mentioned getting some parts from overseas, and I wonder, when we think about long-term solutions to this, I wonder if we're going to be looking at more components being made in the States. Now, that's not going to help us with the current challenges that we have, but it is something that could happen down the road. Is that something that you're watching, and do you see that in the parts that you need?
Yeah, and it's interesting, as a private company that doesn't have to convince analysts how we're performing. What's really kind of interesting is we're not necessarily under that same level of pressure, where you're trying to drive the cost down to as low as it possibly can go. There are other trade-offs we're able to make, but I definitely think that what we've learned from this, and it's interesting, it's benefiting our business, because we compete against European packaging machinery manufacturers and Asian packaging machinery manufacturers. Our customers have actually looked at us and said, you look a lot more desirable, because we can buy equipment from you that's very similar in terms of functionality and quality. We like to think it's better, but they maybe can't convince everybody all the time. And they don't have to put it on a shipping container. They don't have to air freight it. It can be put in a truck and transported from one of our locations here in the US. And so we're seeing, we're our customers' supply chain, we're starting to see them have a strong preference for, kind of onshoring, of their packaging machinery needs. And we're definitely doing the same thing. I think we would be better served to at least have alternatives ready to go in case, kind of the main supply chains falter in the future. It's kind of exposed us a little bit, in terms of that lean mentality. We weren't prepared for this. And like I said, I think we got that false sense of security in 21, like, oh, this is going to be great. And it wasn't until it was a lot later that, like, wow, we're really going to have to work our way through this. And there's some pretty complex issues we're dealing with.
Well, it's fascinating, because from Pearson's point of view, it sounds like there are a couple of things that this market's actually working in your favor. One is US made, and then also the automation that you make automated systems that help with labor shortages in some ways. So,
well, honestly, for us, and I feel a little guilty saying this, because I don't want to take pleasure in other people's misfortune or the global misfortune that we've all been experiencing.
Of course.
But for our industry, the next several years this will be a huge boon to the industry, because to your point, a lot of the facilities, even though there's automation in them, they're still highly dependent on manual labor, and they're working in close proximity to one another. And what we've seen is, the labor pool participation rate dropping. That's, automation is a potential solution for that. When have people who are getting sick, and adhering to quarantine protocols. that's an issue, and that adversely affects our customers' ability to produce their products. And so automation addresses that need. When you think about, because of the lower labor pool participation and the wage inflation that we've seen in many industries that we serve, that's been significant over the last 12 to 18 months, it helps them lower costs. And so we're seeing a lot of companies that have always had automation as a key priority dramatically increase the amount of investment they're making over the next 5 years, really to combat that.
How much of that is because of shifts in the labor market? So we've seen some early retirements and some people leaving the workforce for other reasons. Is that a factor that you've observed either in your company or from your clients?
Both, and it's almost identical. I think we and our customers had a lot of employees that had been very financially responsible throughout their careers, and they were maybe 2 to 5 years from retirement. Then with the onset of COVID and all the issues that entailed, they decided I'm gonna retire early, and they were able to do that. So we saw that. We saw some people who had to leave for childcare, or elder care, any number of things, but for family reasons. We saw that. Our customers saw that, and as a result, we've really seen, it's been harder and harder to meet existing production requirements. With some of those challenges, our customers are certainly feeling that, and as a result, they're investing in automation, at a rate that we haven't seen ever, really.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
Is the product lines staying similar for you, or consistent at least, or
Yeah, it's the same. Yeah, it's case erecting, it's robotic case packing, it's case sealing, it's robotic palletizing. And so the products, have broad applicability to a lot of different industries. We're obviously continuing to evolve the products and change them and make them better, more reliable, more cost effective, more flexible to meet the needs of our customers. But yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. Well, we should be getting ready for some questions here pretty quick. If you have any, please send them our way. I was curious to know what you think is going to be one of the I guess what I'm wondering about is kind of breaking points in this cycle that we're in for supply chain issues. Is there anything that you're watching for, any metrics or developments that you're watching for?
Well, I mean, we're looking at kind of commodity pricing, where for certain things that are key, and availability. We're looking at just the availability of components a little more closely. Now that we can't take it for granted that they're going to be available, we are doing some of those things. I think what we're most really looking at is how is the pandemic evolving. And how are our collective responses to the pandemic and government responses to the pandemic evolving as well? Right now, we're starting to see, with the Omicron variant, we're starting to see, very rapid transmission, and so there was a little bit of interruption in people going to work and things like that. But mercifully, for a lot of people, less severe outcomes, right? And as a result, people are getting back to work sooner, and there isn't as much of a disruption, even in our own state, kind of the way government's reacting to this. I think as we start dealing with this more endemically, right? Not assuming we can get away from it, but how do we best deal with it? I think some of that policy will have a really dramatically positive impact on reducing some of these supply chain reductions and letting us get back to full capacity.
Sure. And do you see demand? What are your projections for demand over the next 3 to 5 years?
Just like on a percentage basis of what kind of increase,
or general trend.
I mean, for us, and there's a variety of reasons, but I mean, we're expecting that we're going to see probably 10, 15, 20%, somewhere in there, increase in revenue year over year, kind of on an ongoing basis as a result of the increase in demand. So it's pretty significant, and we're really seeing it for about a 5-year period of time. Now, I'm sure there's something out there that could interrupt that. So we're not taking it for granted, but the early indications and how we're seeing that is a lot of our customers are talking in those timelines. Instead of, hey, this is what we're doing this year or this quarter or next quarter, they're saying, hey, we're investing X number of $1 billion over the next 5 years, and we need to get, our supply chain in order to be able to provide us with that automation. So they're starting to engage in much longer term discussions. The contract durations are much larger in terms of the number of units and the period of time that those contracts will be in place. And so it's pretty significant.
Companies are looking for more certainty in those.
Yeah. Well, and just examples like, you look at companies like Clorox, for example. Who knew? I think they were stating that, like, when you talk about those Clorox wipes, I think only like 40 to 50% of households had ever purchased a Clorox wipe.
Okay. Yeah.
Within the first 6 months, all of a sudden it went up to like 90% of households had purchased them. And they think it's going to come back to a level that's not going to be that high, but 75%, let's just say.
Sure.
I don't know if that's exactly
higher than it was
accurate,
before.
but it's a step change in demand, and they need to be able to meet those needs. And so customers are investing in a lot of the automation to keep up with that demand, but they're also investing in more flexible automation as well to deal with the inherent variability of the products and services they might be offering as well.
Sure.
So
the other thing I was wondering about is international conflict. So we're seeing more news about Russia going into Ukraine. And up to this point, all we've talked about with supply chain is related to pandemic. In the past, have you seen any changes in your ability to get goods because of international conflicts?
Historically, we have not.
Okay.
We're dealing with a lot of really large companies, like I'll use Rockwell Automation as an example for our electrical and, components, things like that. And we buy them through Columbia Electric Supply. They have such a varied supply chain that even if you have one or two facilities that might be adversely affected by some of that, you might see a small blip, but they can very quickly kind of change, their production and shift production from one facility to another, run multiple shifts, hire more people. What's been interesting about the pandemic is it's affected large swaths and huge geographies, the whole globe, whereas thankfully, most kind of international, kind of incidents, things like this, like the invasion of Ukraine, they're localized, right? And so it might be very significant if you're getting a component out of there, if you have customers or suppliers from there. But in the absence of that, we can get around that typically pretty easily.
Sure. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. Unless something like once in a generation occurs, and I think we all hope that doesn't.
Right.
That's not.
We all kind of hope we're coming out of something once in a generation.
Yeah, exactly.
Paul, do we have any questions yet?
We do. We've got a couple questions. First one is from Mike McBride. How are you investing in packaging that reduces waste or can be reused, recycled?
So we actually don't do the packaging. We build the equipment that automates the process of packaging, of forming a corrugated case or tray. So it's mostly our customers who are driving that, and you'll see companies like Amazon.com. You'll see companies like Coca-Cola. They're investing in different recycled materials, in just different materials, lightening them up. Changing their supply chain so that they're more regional instead of national, so that you don't have to have as much packaging to safely get the product from wherever it's being manufactured to wherever you or I would purchase it. Let's say at Walmart or Kroger or Costco or Rosars. Things like that. So we don't really play a role in that other than we need to adapt our equipment to give them the flexibility to be able to handle kind of more environmentally friendly and less wasteful packaging styles, which we do. We work very closely with our customers to do that, but they're the ones who are driving it.
And we've got a couple of questions from Matt Ewers. Thanks, Matt. I'll take them one at a time. First one is, you mentioned trucking your finished goods to the customer. Are you experiencing delays and even penalties for late deliveries due to the trucking shortage?
So we are. The good news is that for the most part, because it's not just us that's suffering from this, problem. All OEMs in our industry, and frankly, all manufacturers of anything really are struggling with a little bit of this. And so the good news is that at least for the time being, you know, we have customers that aren't happy that their shipments are being delayed or that our deliveries are being delayed. But because it's happening really across the spectrum of people that they work with, they've been, I would say verbally they're not happy, but they've been pretty accommodating and really remarkably patient. So it's not adversely affecting us from a financial perspective yet. What I would say is just the cost of those trucking services has increased. Fuel costs have gone up. And so we are passing along a significant amount of those cost increase to our customers so that our margins really remain healthy. And I mean, we've really experienced really significant inflation. And we've, up to this point in time, been able to pass along those, you know, price increases to get out from under that. And we'll see how long we're able to continue doing that. But so far it's been working okay.
Well, good segue, because Matt's second question is with respect to the transportation cost of your raw materials. Many years ago, this average cost was about 6% of the cost of the product. What percentage are you seeing in today's environment with the shortage of trucks, rising fuel costs, much higher labor rates, and rising insurance, thereby driving up the cost of trucking?
Honestly, I wouldn't be able to tell you as a percentage of the machines, kind of what impact that's having, because most of the things we sell are fairly high dollar, right?
Yeah,
and
sure.
and so it's still a pretty insignificant portion of it, but it adds up across all the machines that we ship into the field. But it's definitely a significant. It's definitely a significant cost. I couldn't tell you what the percentage is, at this point, in time.
Question from Corey Jackson. Where is your main supply chain, probably chain, and why do you choose that specific facility for your needs?
If I understand, kind of the question appropriately. So we operate two facilities here in the United States, one here in Spokane, Washington, and one in the Richmond, Virginia area. And frankly, the headquarters is here in Spokane, and that's also probably 3/4 of the volume of the company is here. So our main supply chain is really here, based in Spokane. And then we work, but there's a lot of homogeneity between the two supply chains. And so a lot of those major purchasing decisions and component decisions are made here. And then we find local distributors in Richmond, Virginia, that are able to also meet our needs. And because we're dealing primarily with Fortune 500, suppliers as well, sure. And their distribution networks, we're dealing with the same people there as we are here generally. Mm-hmm. So.
We have a question from Jeff Thomas. What was the toughest decision that you had to make during the pandemic?
I don't know if that means related to supply chain or just period. I would probably say, and I don't know that there were really any tough decisions, but I would say we made a decision very, very early on to send our employees home and really work remotely, even though we were an essential industry and everyone theoretically could have been in the building. We really embraced remote work very, very aggressively, faster than most companies. And frankly, that had come as a result of some of my exposure and some other boards that I'm on to, people who are on the front lines of this. Sure. and had facilities, in Europe, had facilities in Asia that were really struggling. So we saw the seriousness of the issue very, very early on and made, a very quick decision to really shut the facility down to all but those individuals who are absolutely necessary. And at the time, that wasn't met particularly positively by the majority of our workforce. There were a lot of people who really were concerned about remote work. The irony now is a lot of those people who've been working remotely, we just started coming back in January and February of this year, don't want to come back. And so sure. We've got the exact opposite problem of forcing the issue of, hey, we'd really like to, kind of create that culture again and get us sure. back together on that ad hoc communication and collaboration, but I would say shutting down as early as we did.
Yeah.
The in-person work.
That's the last of the supply chain questions. Oh, I hear it. Here's another one from Mike McBride. It's my understanding that that person stopped pre-employment drug tests, and that has helped with employee retention and recruitment, as many of our competitors do drug tests. not quite it's my understanding that Pearson stopped pre-employment drug testing. Has that, you did not? Okay.
We did not. What we did a couple of years ago was with the legalization of marijuana. We actually took the screen for marijuana out of the pre-employment drug test and the ad hoc drug tests that we also do, the random drug testing that we do. Some of our customers, though, to this day, still require us to do drug testing for individuals who come in, and so it's a complex issue. But we still do pre-employment drug testing. The only change really is, again, that we loosened the restrictions on marijuana use as it was legal in this state, and it put us, in pretty difficult position to be able to manage that given the legality. But again, we still do have a lot of customers that want to be assured, and they still do screen for marijuana, and those employees do need to not use that. We have a zero tolerance policy for prescription pills, for alcohol, for marijuana. Being intoxicated on the job site certainly is probably the most serious thing you could ever do. As an employee, that would really result in your almost immediate termination. But yeah, we haven't really changed that at all. And by the way, that decision was made not to make it easier to find people. It was really more just an equity issue of if I go home and I have a glass of wine legally, do I really want to prevent an employee who is incredibly productive, incredibly loyal, has a long-standing relationship with the company? Do we really want to go ahead and fire them for the use of what in this state is a legal substance? And we made the decision that we didn't want to find ourselves in that position.
Sure.
Question from Eric Williams. Realizing we're all guessing with our predictions, how deep into the supply chain do you think the reshoring will be? For example, rare earth minerals are needed for many high-tech components, and China mines more than 90% of the world's rare earth.
So we're so much farther down. We're consuming obviously the end product that's reliant on that. I'm not hearing that. It's interesting. I'm not hearing from our suppliers, the Rockwell Automations of the world, the Fanuc Robotics, of the world. I'm not really hearing them state that they think they're going to radically reimagine everything right away. I think it's going to be, just taking steps in the right direction, that we don't want to whipsaw, kind of the other direction, to onshoring or reshoring, but that it's maybe a little more balanced. So from our perspective, we're going to continue probably really working with the suppliers of those key components that we always have had. And certainly we're going to want to understand what they're doing in order to, ensure that there's the highest probability that we're going to be able to get the components that we need from them when we need them to meet our customers' demands. But we're not hearing from those big suppliers that we work with that they're radically reimagining things now, although I fully anticipate that they will. We are hearing that they're starting to talk about creating production lines here in the United States, that, the product that they're building in the United States might be more expensive than the one that they're currently sourcing and manufacturing, let's say in Vietnam or in China. And then they're giving us the opportunity, to purchase at those prices. And I think we'll be very balanced in our approach and very open to a certain portion of what we're, consuming, trying to get as much of that, really, or a certain portion of that manufactured more close to home.
So one last question, but I'm only going to ask this if you happen to know Kevin Jones.
I do.
And are okay with this because it's not a supply chain question.
Right.
And it is, are you going to get a new dog when Sherman passes on?
My wife says no, there will be no more dogs in the Senske family, but she appears to love the dog more than anyone else. So I'm somewhat suspicious that we'll end up with another dog. I'm pretty sure we will.
Yeah. Well, I'd like to appeal to Mrs. Senske to please reconsider. Well, thank you all for joining us today. I thank you, Michael. Fantastic conversation. Appreciate your time and insight. Please join us next month. As Paul mentioned, we have Nicole Sohn from Discovery Daycare coming to join us and talk about the child care crisis. Until then, stay safe and enjoy your evening.